Hello, fellow heathens, and welcome to another episode of the Southern Heathens Podcast. My name is CRAFTSman, and joining me is Oba Umirison, and we are the Southern Heathens. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing great. I'm glad to be back on this episode. The first episode went by really well, and I think it's going to be a great thing. Let's go ahead and just tell our listeners about kind of how we met, why we're here together. We met through your mother, and I was the founder of what used to be the Druid Order of North America, and I don't consider myself a Druid any longer. My path has grown separate from that, and that's fine. But she was a member of our High Council, and we met through her, and things have grown and blossomed since then, and I think it's amazing how our paths have crossed. How do you feel about how things started?
Yeah, it was through I remember her telling me about the Druid Order that she had became a part of, because she became a pagan about maybe a year after me. So then she met you. She told me all about you, and then you sent me a friend request on Facebook, and then after you guys left the Druid Order, we kind of started our own order of sorts, not any specific pagan order. It was just, it's called the Arcane Assembly, which is a reserved, membership only type, if anyone was wondering. But that's our group, you can say. But yeah, ever since we all got closer, and it was really cool, to have friends in other places.
Right.
And after deep consideration, last August, I decided to save up a bunch of money, pack up my stuff, and this last January, I moved here to Northeast Mississippi, and haven't looked back since.
A lot of people don't realize that, and we'll probably cover this extensively in another episode, that this part of Mississippi is considered part of the Appalachians, right at the foothills, along with Tennessee and parts of Alabama. So the spiritual power here, it's amazing. People don't quite understand that, and I think that works really well for people like us. We can draw off that energy. The way I feel, it's almost like we've been family forever. It's being so close with somebody, to choose a family member rather than be born with a family member. That bond to me it's a lot stronger. Do you agree?
I do. Yeah. It's been wild, to think, especially having a friend over 2,000 miles away from my birthplace, and it's been a cool journey since it's all started, and I'm excited for more. And also, to touch on the Appalachian subject again, I did not know that. And also, the one thing I will say before we get on to the next topic is, when I first got here, everyone has that, not accusation, what word? The assumption. Everyone's under the assumption, all the South is just a bunch of flatlands, but where we're at, definitely not. It's definitely not like, the tallest mountains in the world, but there's still mountains, and there's still a lot of foothills. And we definitely do not live in a city flat area at all, I would say. And it's very beautiful. I traveled a lot when I was a kid with my dad, who was a truck driver, and drove all across the country. Mississippi was one of the places I didn't go to. However, I have been to Tennessee before. I've been to Alabama. I've been to West Virginia, and I've been all around, through the Appalachians and whatnot. So that, to think now that I'm a part of it and actually living a part of it, I think it's awesome.
Yeah. And I'm going to preface this by saying it's not impossible to be a practicing witch or sorcerer or pagan in the city. However, I do believe that when living in nature, that connection with nature is much more powerful than when you're living in a concrete jungle. So I think it makes it a lot easier for us to live the lifestyle that we wish to live, to be more humble, more nature-centric. So it's a perfect spot, and I'm really glad you're here, and it's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, it's been fun, man. Been getting a lot of things done, but also having time to do this, and also doing little mini rituals, offerings, and even daily stuff too. It's nice because it's quiet, and there you hear some loud trucks or motorcycles here and there, but it's not, there's no constant traffic. The only other time that I'll hear something on the property is basically if I start up my truck, and that's about it. Other than that, you can hear the birds. You can hear the deer by their footsteps, even though you can't see them because there's so many trees here. But yeah, it's beautiful. It's gorgeous, and I do agree that being out in nature does help that connection with the gods and ancestors too.
Right. And it's also amazing how when we do rituals, and no matter how small they are, even say hanging a rune or a Gulderstaffer on a tree or something, how the animals seem to be attracted to that. And every time we do something like that, the hawks circle above, and we hear deers in the tree, and it's an amazing experience. Speaking of rituals, one of the main topics of this episode is going to be religion and spirituality, rather religion versus spirituality, because a lot of people can't separate the two. Because I think I mentioned in episode 1 how a lot of religions are dogmatic, and a lot of heathens can be dogmatic, because heathenry is a religion. Norse paganism is a religion. There are texts. There are particular writings that tell us, how certain things were done with certain gods and whatnot, which, would kind of separate it from spirituality to some extent, in my opinion. And I'm fine with that. So what is your opinion with our path, based on the religious aspect and the spiritual aspect?
Honestly, I go about both. Spiritually, I've always thought of it as being definitely like 100% internal with outside aspects, whereas religion is definitely an external thing with internal aspects as well. Religiously, especially within Norse paganism, I try my best to read the texts, read the Eddas, the sagas, and whatnot. And when it comes to bloats, when it comes to ceremonies, holidays, I try to do the best I can to follow those. But then again, this is not 1,000 years ago or more. This is 2022. So I try to, go as I can. And the spiritual aspect of it would also be, too, the things that I would feel internally during a ritual or a bloat. Even a lot of tattoos that I have, most of them I would say are not. I mean, you could say they're religious, especially with the runes on them, but at the same time, I would say they're definitely more spiritual because of the feeling I get internally with them. So, and also too, bringing that to my point, this is a word that it's been here, for a long time, especially after the three main religions kind of took over the world: Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Our paganism in general, Greek, Roman, Norse, Germanic, Celtic, Gallic, whatever it is, they call them mythologies. For me, I don't like to call them mythologies. I don't care if people do, especially if they're not heathens or pagans and they don't recognize it. So that's what they'll call it. I'm not offended or anything. But I personally do not call it mythology, and I haven't for a long time, because to me it makes no sense, because to us it's not a mythology.
Right. A mythology should be referred to and reserved for particular religious or spiritual practices that are no longer active, no longer observed. So, the Greeks, they still observe their pagan religion. Of course, the Norse, Hindu, the Buddhists, although, none of those are mythologies. They're religions.
I would say Hinduism is probably the best example, because they never, Hinduism never died out. Right. Norse paganism, I think, never truly died out, but most of it was, almost completely erased. And I think, even in the words of Jackson Crawford, we know if you were to rate it on a percentage scale, we probably know maybe 5% of
Right.
What the ancestors did, and who they worshipped. But yeah, again, Hinduism I think is the best example on how paganism itself has not died out and it's not a myth. Greeks, in fact, as of 2016, they just now officially recognize their old pagan religion as an actual religion of Greece, which is awesome. Kind of weird to think though, because in school, I don't know about any of our listeners, but in school, I was one of the first what they called mythologies was Greek and Roman that
Right.
we learned about, and then eventually Norse. And you learn about that. You watch movies all the time about Greek gods, Greek heroes, and all the amazing stories, But they, it's crazy to think that this country that is so well known for their gods and their heroes, Zeus, Hercules, Aphrodite, Athena, all these were so famous at the world one time, or in the world one time, and also obviously the Greek Empire and the Roman Empire too. And now, when they were converted, it was labeled as a mythology, but now it's reviving, and that's, to me, I think it's awesome.
Yeah, and it's beautiful to see our ancestral religions reviving. There's a lot of power in the pagan community with ancestral veneration and ancestral. I wouldn't say worship, but I mean it depends on, of course, the people, but the honoring of our ancestors is a very powerful aspect, and bringing back their traditions, I think, makes it that much more powerful. So, what kind of things do you do? I know there's a lot of things that I do to honor my ancestors. I act a certain way, I hold myself a certain way, I do certain things. So, what are some of the things that you do?
Well, for one thing I've lately been doing is, which I've been slacking on a little bit, especially with the move, but my great-great-grandparents on my dad's side were from Ukraine, but it was during the time of the Russian Empire, so they spoke Russian. But one of the things I'm actually doing right now is learning Russian. One day, hope to speak it fluently, and I actually have a tattoo on my calf. In Russian language, you don't say hail to, you would say glory to. And it says, glory to my ancestors, without them I wouldn't be here. So that's one of the things I got dedicated to them. And then also, a lot of things that I wear, necklace-wise, a lot of them actually, I would say 1, 2, 3, 4, and I think a fifth one. 5 necklaces total that are all a mix of Ukrainian and Russian, basically Slavic necklaces I got from Eiríkr Úlfrsson. And if you guys want, he's, in my opinion, he's the best craftsman I've ever gotten anything from. You can go to his shop, UlfsvaettrCraftsman, or his Etsy, which would be etsy.com or etsy.com/shop/UlfsvaettrCraftsman, and that is Ulfsvaettter, and then Craftsman. I'm assuming you guys know how to spell Craftsman. But yeah, those are some of the things that I try to wear as often as I can, just to represent them, and also it's a part of who I am because I come from them. And daily things too. As you were saying earlier about holding yourself to a certain standard, I try to as well, and just trying to be better in case I do have kids one day, and my descendants can look up to me one day as their good ancestor. What are some of the things that you do?
Some of the things I do have. I have some Scandinavian, mostly Norwegian. My lineage can be traced into Norway and into England and Scotland. So I have a personality kind of that's molded around those particular areas. And there's some stuff that I do that you even make fun of, like my love for potatoes, because I'm a Scotsman. I love potatoes. I try my best to take care of my family, which is a very Scottish thing to do. Or I work as hard as I can because I know my ancestors, they worked really hard to make a life for themselves in areas that, you couldn't even really farm properly. I don't really have, I have some tattoos as well, Celtic style tattoos. I don't really have much jewelry, but I do wear like the arm ring, and I wear my Tiwaz pendant, and basically I've molded my personality around how I thought my ancestors would act. I think that's one of the most honorable ways to honor or glorify your ancestors is to be more like them. So
Yeah, I would say the same thing too. Like one thing I forgot to mention earlier was, and this is a common dish, all over Slavic countries, is borscht, and it's basically a meat and vegetable soup, mainly with beets, or you can have spinach in it, and cabbage too. But it's very common. Anyone here who is of Russian or Ukrainian or Belarusian or Slavic descent knows what I'm talking about. I mean, anyone else probably does know what I'm talking about, but I started recently actually cooking that myself because I never cooked before, but when I got deep into my ancestry, it like spoke to me, and it was just something I wanted to do,
Right.
And maybe one day I can go visit Ukraine. Obviously, times right now kind of forbid me from doing that, but one day, I hope I can go to Kiev, where they're from. So, also too, one thing that I try doing is. And I guess this can go for anyone's ancestors, really. But one thing I really try to do is keep up in shape, and not like in shape as in I'm trying to be the buffest buffest dude who can also run a marathon. Like no, I've competed in United States Powerlifting Association for the last 4 years. I've now switched over to Olympic style weightlifting, which I hope to be competing in probably a year, not in the Olympics, but in just a local competition. But that's something I try to keep up on too as well, and I think that can be an ancestral thing or something that can be dedicated to certain gods, like everyone knows, Thor being the strongest of the Aesir. It's something to keep in shape, but it's also something to have fun. It's not something that's going to be was never boring to me.
Right.
Putting in all those hours to be the strongest I can be, even after all the injuries and whatnot, it's all worth it to me in the end, and feels right, feels ancestral, because I don't think people realize, back then, if you look at strength, not strength sports, but like what our ancestors did in their everyday lives, that we could consider strength training today because they didn't have the equipment we do now,
Right.
to lift up these big rocks, to buck hay, do simple farm work. Simple farm work back then versus now, I don't know how much different it would be, but I guarantee it was a lot. In some ways, it was probably a lot harder than it was back then, for sure.
Well, yeah. I mean, before we moved into this particular area, I lived out by those cotton fields, and when I would drive by, I see these farmers with these huge tractors. I mean, the tractor was at least 50 feet wide, and it was picking up the cotton, separating the cotton from the stems and all that, cleaning the cotton out, and baling it all at the same time. So, I mean, those kind of machines definitely make it so much easier to farm. I mean, it's not as much of a physically demanding job anymore as people think it is. I mean, I'm certain some farms are, like smaller farms, where they can't afford that kind of equipment, but it's definitely different today than it was then. So there are things that we can do, like you said, strength training and stuff that would be almost like the equivalent of what they had to do to survive. So I think that's a great point. So.
And I think we mentioned this too before in the last episode was, how we're definitely, compared to our ancestors, we're definitely, privileged to not live as hard of a life as they had to. And with that being said, that's why, when I am in the weight room, I treat it as such. It is a privilege to not just like afford a gym membership, but also to be able to have the right equipment, and also have a coach, to help like
Right.
that. It's a big help, and I treat it, with the best way possible. I don't want to be messing around in there. I want to do what I have to do, stretch afterwards, do anything else that my coach requires me to do, and get out, and then eat what I have to. Eat in the best way possible too.
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's many things that we can do to honor our ancestors. A lot of our ancestors were warriors. They had to fight to survive. I'm deep into martial arts. I've studied martial arts most of my young and adult life. So I think that's another way to honor your ancestors, is to carry on some traditions that they fought so hard to keep. The warrior aspect, the honor, the basically like a warrior's code. It's different for some cultures what that kind of warrior's code is, but it all basically amounts to the same thing. It's honor, respect, humility, stuff like that. And the martial arts teaches that. So I think that's something that I also use to help venerate my ancestors.
Yeah, and I think veneration, worship, honoring, those all play a big role in at least how I practice, and I'm pretty sure you too, how we practice paganism. And it's funny, we mentioned earlier, how I'm going to go back to this point about the religion and the spirituality, and when I mentioned how after the big three religions kind of took over the world,
right?
There's from what I've heard, and I can't, someone can correct me, that's fine, but I've heard many times from people in groups, pagan groups that, especially, for example, some people in Scandinavia, and you probably heard this in some of the sagas too, or I think it's sagas or the Eddas, but after the Christianization of Iceland, at first paganism was basically just to be practiced at home, and then eventually it got outlawed. But that didn't keep some families from still practicing it. Some even got converted, but they weren't actually, they didn't actually really convert themselves to Christianity. They just did it to blend in. But a lot of families in these groups that I've heard of, they don't reveal themselves a whole lot, but they definitely still practice it and have for many generations. One famous story that I thought was awesome was this person's, I think it was their great aunt or their grandma. She had passed away, and they were going through her stuff through the house, and there was I think it was a hidden door or something like that. There was a hidden door, but it was in there was an altar with a rotted apple, and it was dedicated to the Norse god Bragi, the god of poetry.
Wow, yeah.
And I thought that was amazing, and no one knew, because this woman still went to Catholic church as far as her family was concerned, because they were all Catholic. But yeah, inside she still had that secret altar to Bragi.
Yeah. Well, when something is so powerful it's in your blood, there's no way, no matter how hard somebody tries, and we all know that it's different today than it was back then, but there were many atrocities committed by Christianity towards the pagan people that, you can't really snuff everything out. There's no way. So I mean, it's beautiful to see that even families that have practiced this for generations and generations and generations, and those are the families that probably know more about these practices than anybody else, probably even the PhD experts. You know what I'm saying? So, there's no way that the particular religion in power, and I'm using air quotes, in power, can snuff out somebody else's truly held beliefs. I mean, it's in your blood, it's in your soul, it's part of your bones. It's part of your structure. And it's going to stay with you forever, and that's just fact.
Yeah, and to be quite fair, the world was pagan for a very much longer than any of those three religions have ever been, on the planet.
Right.
As far as I know, and the fact that it's coming back, and it's obviously a reconstruction, basically. I don't think that it will truly be wiped out like people think it will. I don't think it will. Even with even with Wicca. I mean, I'm not a Wiccan. I don't have any problem with Wiccans, but even that revival shows something. Like I said, I'm not really a fan of it, but I have no problem with it. But even that movement is still growing,
Right.
and that if that can grow, and also too with the Norse pagan community growing, it's insane, to see. And I've even heard in other countries that their old faiths are coming back in South America, in Africa.
Right.
So yeah, and even some in the Middle East too.
Yeah.
There was, it's crazy to see, and then even in Russia today, I don't know if a lot of people actually know this, but there's still quite a few old pagan statues of old Slavic gods that are in random spots out in the wilderness. People take pictures of them all the time. Some of them have gotten taken down, sadly, by some other folks, but definitely they're still there, like you were saying. It can never truly be wiped out.
Yeah, and that speaking along to that point, the resurgence of paganism to me really shows me that it still always has been a pagan world, because people just don't fall back into something unless it's in their blood. It speaks to them somehow or some way, which tells me that it's the proper way to go. It's more natural. It's part of who we are. And
in the human race, he means.
Yeah, we're humans for sure. I'm not winking at all.
We're not aliens.
Well, it speaks to me, and I'm not trying to offend anybody, but it's unnatural to me. It speaks to the unnatural state of monotheism. That may be a controversial statement, but for me, it's a very unnatural way to worship anything, because it's just never has been, and there's an off chance that this developed in some small part of the world, and it spread like wildfire at the end of a sword, so it's just an unnatural way to believe that there's just one all-knowing, all-powerful deity that created everything. You don't see that anywhere in nature. You don't see that anywhere at all. There's always a system. There's always more than one thing working together to keep that system together. So I think that the natural world shows exactly how the divine world operates.
Yeah, I agree with that. I really do. That's it's a big point that I don't think people understand. I think people today too, and not just monotheists, but even people who are either atheist or agnostic or who don't really hold a belief. We're still raised in this world today, and I think it's because of monotheism that everyone wants to be, happy all the time, because they say, when you go to heaven, you'll be up in the clouds singing, with Yahweh, and you'll be happy all the time. And to me, that's just unrealistic, because that's not how, like you were saying, the natural world is a great example. That's definitely not how it works. Happiness is probably the last thing, that you'll find out in the natural world. There might be moments of it, but it's not 100% all the time. It's about survival. It's about enduring the harshness of life. When you see one of my favorite animals too, crocodile. When you see in Africa, especially in the Nile River, and you see all those wildebeests crossing the Nile River, you see those hungry crocodiles just waiting, for their next meal, and the wildebeest has to get through, and this whole herd has to get through. And they know that not all of them are going to make it, and that is just it's a harsh part, but it's the truth.
Right.
That's just the way it goes. It's the circle of life. That's what they call it.
Yeah, we were having this exact conversation the other day. Happiness is a fleeting emotion. We have bits of happiness in our lives, and we have a lot of hardship and struggle. And what we do is we look forward to those happy moments. But if all we do is focus on those happy moments, we realize we don't have as much of them as we think we should. And people get depressed, and their emotional state, their mental state, kind of goes spiraling down. When it's when they're taught that they should be happy all the time, and they realize that they can't be happy all the time. Nobody can. Happiness is a very fleeting thing. You just have to have your own brand of happy. Being content to me is happy. I'm content with my life. Not everything's great. Not everything's running as smooth as I think it should. but I'm content, which makes me my own brand of happy. And it's, it doesn't mean everything's perfect. So people have to really get out of that mindset that everything's got to be perfect. I've got to be smiling all the time. Things have, I've got to hear birds chirping over my shoulder 24/7. That's not life. It's not how it's going to be. If you keep thinking that way, you're just going to destroy your own emotional health. And people need to realize that.
I agree with that too. I've seen it happen to many people, and it's sad to see. And all you can do really is just be there for them. Some people don't like the harsh truth, and that's fine. They have to, a lot of people are what you would call hard learners. They have to learn it the hard way, and that's fine. And that's just another example, of the natural world. For me, happiness after I've had depression just like a lot of people have, and that was a very big part of it, was understanding that you can't be happy 24/7, and that being content with something, I would say, because I wouldn't say I'm content to the point where I have everything under control, everything like that. I'm content with the fact that I don't have everything together, but I'm working towards it, and I'm also content with the fact that I'm on like an adventure right now. I'm in a place, like I said before, 2,000 miles away from my birthplace. It's not my home anymore. That's why I call it a birthplace. But yeah, so I would say the adventurous part for me, that helps me the most, because on an adventure, regardless of where you're going, you could go to a very dangerous place, or you can go to a so-called safe place. Either way, both places are still going to be dangerous in some sort of way. And that's the whole adventure. That's the whole, that's the thrill about it. When we go out in the woods over here, we have wild boar, and they're not something to mess with.
Right.
It's awesome to, go out into the woods, in the backyard, and just go walk. But at the same time, probably best to carry a gun with you, or at least a big knife in case something, happens. Even up in Washington, when we went out in the woods, you still had to watch out for bear, cougar, all that stuff. But again, for me, it was the thrill of the adventure. That's what made it. That's what made me happy in a different way, I guess. It's just
Right.
going through it, and then the happiness part for me comes afterwards. When you can tell the story to your kids, to your family, to your friends. Yeah, telling the story after that, saying, we went on like a 10-mile hike to this, that, and the third, whatever. The last one I had that I was, it was during lockdown, but it was a nice hike. I wasn't prepared for it, for sure, because I was really out of shape in terms of hiking, because I hadn't done it in a long time. But we went up to Mount St. Helens, me and my mom and my stepdad, and we didn't hike the mountain, but we did a trail near it. And don't get me wrong, I was tired. I was really, really tired, but you know what? Even after sweating a shit ton and everything, it was fun. Seeing the tree cover, seeing the land, the forest, and places where up there, not a lot of people live up there. Like less than 1,000 people live up there. So it was really cool just to know that, hey, I've never been up here before, and I'm going into uncharted territory in my mind. Because I don't know what's going to happen. All I know what's going to happen is that this is an adventure, and that's it.
Right. Well, those kind of things, it brings your adrenaline up. And when you get excited, your brain releases dopamine into your system, which is it causes a type of euphoria, which is a type of happiness. So people do seek things like that for emotional release, for happiness. But a lot of people don't realize that, evolutionarily speaking, paranoia and being on guard and being all that kind of stuff is the default for human beings. We are, at the end of the day, animals. We are animals just like every other animal on this planet. We were created just like them. So we're meant to be on guard. The unnatural state is the luxury we live in these days. That's unnatural for an animal species, because we no longer have to look over our shoulder all the time for problems. So we create the problem, and people don't realize that's really the case. We're not always in danger. We don't have to sleep with one eye open hardly anymore unless you live in like Chicago or something like that.
Yeah.
So, happiness is fleeting. I know we've spent quite a bit of time on this subject, but it's important. Happiness is fleeting. Don't rely on that feeling 100% of the time, or you're just going to be disappointed. We're coming up on about 40 minutes here, and I think this was a pretty good episode. We've covered a lot of stuff. Is there anything else you want to mention?
One thing that I can mention is the last point of that, short and simple. Go outside more, and just kind of go wander. Be safe, of course. Be prepared, but just go wander.
Right.
Go to a trail you've never been to before. Make sure you got proper equipment. But go wander. Wandering is like Odin has and probably still is wandering. In the forever pursuit of knowledge.
Right.
And you can do the same in a human way, obviously, not a god way, but
at least for humans.
Yeah, and just go and either whether you're seeking wisdom, seeking knowledge, seeking adventure. I don't know if you like camping. I'm definitely a big camper. I love it. I love being out and just not having a house over my head. I like just a little tent. Or even a little hut if I had the time to make one.
Yeah.
So, go outside and just live in the moment.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Going out in nature, doing stuff like that brings you closer to your spiritual self, brings you closer to the gods. And that's the main goal of what we're trying to do with this podcast, what we're trying to do with our lives, bringing people and ourselves closer to the gods. And that's what's most important. So if you like the content today, and I hope you did, go ahead and give us a like, a follow, and you can reach us at thesouthernheathens@gmail.com. We're working on a website, and probably we're going to have a Facebook and all that stuff coming up. But if you did like the content, just go ahead and give us a like and follow, and we will see you next time. Thank you.